Workplace Hazards and Risk Control, Comprehensive Guide to Element 6, Paper 2. Welcome to Phani EHS Info. In this video, we'll focus on Element 6, Workplace Hazards and Risk Control. Element 6 is all about identify common workplace hazards and implement effective risk control measures. We'll provide an overview of this element and highlight key exam questions to help you prepare effectively for NEBOSH IGC Paper 2. Physical hazards. Let's start with physical hazards. These include risks associated with noise, vibration, radiation, and temperature extremes. To manage these hazards, control measures such as engineering controls, personal protective equipment, PPE, and safe work practices are essential. For example, using noise-cancelling equipment for excessive noise or implementing cooling systems for extreme temperatures can help mitigate these risks. Chemical and biological hazards. Next, we'll discuss chemical and biological hazards. Exposure to harmful chemicals and biological agents can pose significant risks. Conducting thorough risk assessments and implementing control measures like substitution, proper ventilation, and safe storage practices are critical. For instance, substituting less hazardous chemicals or ensuring proper ventilation in areas where chemicals are used can greatly reduce exposure risks. Ergonomic hazards. Finally, let's cover ergonomic hazards. These are related to manual handling, workstation design, and repetitive tasks. Applying ergonomic principles can help minimize strain and reduce the risk of injury. This may involve designing workstations to suit individual needs, using mechanical aids for heavy lifting, and promoting regular breaks to prevent repetitive strain injuries. Next, we'll review important questions from this element that you need to know for NEBOSH IGC Paper 1. Identify welfare and work environment requirements that should be provided in a workplace. The welfare and work environment requirements that should be provided in a workplace include the provision of an adequate number of sanitary conveniences and washing facilities including showers for both sexes. Storage areas for clothing including lockers and changing areas. Facilities for the cleaning and replacement of working clothes. A rest room away from the working area with the facility for taking food and drink. The provision of effective and sufficient ventilation for the work area. An adequate heating system to maintain a reasonable temperature throughout the building. An adequate standard of lighting for the tasks being undertaken. The provision of adequate space. Provision of suitable seating at the workstations. The introduction of control measures to combat excessive noise. Identify 4 health effects of working outside in extreme heat created by the sun. Working out of doors in extreme heat caused by the sun may result in health effects such as burns, damage to the eyes, skin cancer, dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, sweat rash, prickly heat, headaches, fainting, fatigue and stress. Outline control measures that could be used to reduce the effects of the sun on construction workers. The control measures that could be used to reduce the effects of the sun on workers include limiting the duration of exposure by job rotation, ensuring periods of work are alternated with periods of rest. Avoiding work when temperatures are at their highest. Ensuring an adequate supply of drinking water. The use of appropriate clothing for working in high temperatures. Persuading workers to adopt a policy of keeping their bodies covered. Encouraging workers to maintain their salt levels. Working under canopies where this is possible. Wearing hats and eye protection and Applying sun protection cream. Describe the measures that can be taken to reduce the risk to workers who are exposed to ultraviolet radiation from sunlight and are exposed to cold temperatures. The measures that can be taken to reduce the risk to workers who are exposed to ultraviolet radiation from sunlight include the provision of advice to workers on the need to protect themselves from the sun, encouraging them to keep covered up during the summer months, and especially at lunch time when the sun is at its most powerful. The provision of shelter where workers might take their breaks. Providing sunscreen and urging workers to use it on any part of the body that they are unable to cover up. The measures that can be taken to reduce the risk to workers who are exposed to cold temperatures include: decide whether the work might be delayed until the weather got warmer without compromising safety. If this was not possible, personal protective clothing appropriate for the environmental conditions would have to be issued to the workers. Workers should be allowed to take more frequent rest breaks in heated facilities and encouraged to drink warm fluids such as soup. Workers should also be given advice on recognizing the symptoms of cold stress, on how the effects of hand-arm vibration syndrome might be exacerbated by working in cold weather, and on the precautions to be taken. Outline the precautions to be taken to minimize the risks to persons working in cold stores at sub-zero temperatures. The following precautions need consideration for persons working in cold environments. Procedures. Safe system of work. Undertaking a suitable and sufficient risk assessment the person. Provision of thermal clothing such as insulated suits or jackets, gloves and head covering. Drying out facilities for this clothing. Restricting time spent in the cold store. Regular breaks. The availability of warm drinks. Precautions against being locked in the cold store such as doors capable of being opened from the inside and alarms. Measures to protect the employees against the escape of refrigerant gas equipment. Racking designed to withstand low temperatures. The removal of ice buildup. The need for pre-employment examinations and continuing health surveillance. The provision to employees of information and training on the potential hazards associated with this type of work and the precautions to be observed. Describe the effects inadequate lighting in a workplace would have on health and safety. Eye strain is a significant factor if close work is required and the lighting not being adequate to allow this. In addition, a brighter level of lighting may be required for an older person doing such work when compared to a younger worker. Headaches as a direct result of the eye strain noted above. Person's ability to concentrate on the work may be affected by either eye strain or the resultant headache. This may be exaggerated by flickering lights. Adopting poor posture insofar as the persons affected will be adjusting their work position to achieve better vision. Tripping over unseen objects may be due to excessive shadows. Human error is likely to increase as there will be an inability to see or perceive certain hazards. Flickering lights may induce pre-existing medical conditions such as certain types of epileptic fits. Outline which factors that should be considered in an assessment of the adequacy of lighting within an open plan office. The tasks being carried out, detailed close work or general lighting. The age of persons doing the work. Older persons may require a brighter level of lighting. The equipment being used. The size and layout of the office, eye distance of workstations to windows and the use of partitions. Natural light available at different times of the day and during the year, seasonal. Suitability of the number, type, intensity and hue of artificial lights. Computer screen glare and or shadow. Shadowed areas of the work environment may increase the likelihood of hazards being generated. localized lighting, need for and availability of, maintenance of non-functional, flickering, damaged or dirty lights, provision and adequacy of emergency lighting. Identify control measures that an employer could take to reduce the risk of violence between workers. The control measures that an employer could take to reduce the risk of violence between workers include briefing staff on problems that are likely to occur and giving them training in dealing with them, such as de-escalation techniques. Introducing a policy of zero tolerance for workplace violence. Setting up procedures for reporting any occurrence of violence. Providing counseling for both perpetrators and victims of violence. Arranging for relocation in different parts of the worksite where this is possible. Introducing a policy for alcohol and substance misuse, including the disciplinary action to be taken against offenders. Prohibiting the carrying of weapons on site. Employing security personnel together with CCTV. Introducing a recruitment strategy. Identify control measures that can be implemented to reduce the risk of violence in a busy accident and emergency department. Control measures for managing aggressive behavior. Management of operations. Training. Provide staff with training to recognize, diffuse, and manage aggressive behavior. Staffing levels. Ensure adequate staffing to handle potential conflicts. Security procedures. Implement strict procedures for drug storage and issuance. Security staff. Deploy security personnel to deter known offenders. Communication. Maintain effective communication with patients, especially regarding waiting times. Public areas. Lighting. Ensure areas are well lit. Decor and furnishings. Create a calm and open environment with thoughtful decor and furnishings. Staff protection. Counter design. Use wide counters and raised floors for protection. Security features. Install coded locks on doors, CCTV systems, panic buttons, and alarms. Policy display. Post signs promoting a zero-tolerance policy towards violence. Outline the measures an employer might consider to minimize the risk of violence against workers. Risk assessment to identify hazards and evaluate controls. Develop and enforce internal policies on violence and encourage reporting. Implement physical security measures like entry systems, screens, and lighting. Use CCTV to monitor activity. Provide alarm systems for staff. Remove potential weapons from entrance and secure items if needed. Improve seating and provide clear information on delays. Use non-cash alternatives or remove cash daily. Manage queues efficiently. Ensure sufficient staff and appropriate opening hours. Check visitor credentials. Accompany staff and avoid lone working. Enhance communication. Enforce a zero-tolerance policy for aggressive behavior. Outline factors that may increase the risk of violence in the workplace. The factors that may increase the risk of violence in the workplace include working alone or after normal working hours. Work involving the handling of money or other valuables. Work involving the exercise of authority such as enforcement. Employment involving working with people susceptible to violent outbursts or with mental health issues, as do, for example, health practitioners or those in the prison service. Dealing with people under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Employment involving working or traveling in the community. Dealing with people suffering from stress. Inappropriate design of the workplace with a lack of visual security. A failure to give employees at risk training and information, particularly in the diffusion technique. Outline the factors that should be taken into account when planning traffic routes for internal transport. Keep pedestrians and vehicles apart. Separate routes, designated crossing places, and suitable barriers at recognized danger spots. High visibility clothing to be provided and worn if necessary. Clearly marked and signed traffic routes. Roads, gangways and aisles should have sufficient width clearance for the largest vehicle. Roads, gangways and aisles should have sufficient overhead clearance for the largest vehicle. Speed limits established and enforced. Adequate lighting to be provided. Ensure good all-round visibility. Provision of clear directional signs. Clear marking of doors and access egress points. Avoid designing in sharp and/or blind bends. Avoid overhead obstructions. The floor surface should be suitable and sufficient for the intended traffic. Floors and traffic routes to be adequately maintained. Avoid reversing if possible. Make people aware of the movement of vehicles. Outline the precautions that might be needed to ensure the safety of pedestrians in areas where vehicles are in use. A segregated system for vehicles and pedestrian traffic. Appropriate roadway and aisle markings. Establishing and enforcing site rules. The provision of refuges. The wearing of high visibility clothing. Good standards of housekeeping. Training and supervision of all those concerned involved. Outline ways in which accidents on stairs may be prevented. Adequate width of walkways to be ensured. Stairs to be fitted with handrails. Lighting levels are to be adequate for the environment and traffic. Emergency lighting provision to be ensured. Surfaces should be non-slip. Outside walkways stairs to be covered. Procedures in place and enforced for the timely removal of spillages. Maintenance of defects to be undertaken in a timely manner. Introduce and enforce a defect reporting procedure. Instigate appropriate site rules for the use of stairs. Outline the means by which the risk of accidents from reversing vehicles within a workplace can be reduced. Introduction and enforcement on one-way systems. Drive-through systems. Designated turning circles, marked and enforced. Separation of vehicles and pedestrians. Suitable workplace design, size and markings. Audible reversing alarms. Mirrors on at blind corners. Adequate levels of lighting to remove shadow or reduce dazzle glare. Use of trained banksmen. Wearing of high visibility clothing. Site rules introduced and enforced. Training of all concerned. Identify control measures to reduce the risk of accidents from reversing vehicles in the workplace. The control measures to reduce the risk of accidents from reversing vehicles in the workplace include the avoidance of the need for vehicles to reverse by the introduction of one-way systems or a drive-in drive-out layout. The separation of vehicles and pedestrians by the erection of barriers and signs. Vehicle design including the provision of good visibility, audible alarms, mirrors and sensors. Positioning mirrors at blind corners in the workplace and providing refuges. Good standards of lighting. Procedural measures such as driver and pedestrian training. The use of banksmen. Site rules for reversing operations. The use of high visibility clothing by those working in areas where there is vehicle access. Outline the design features of the traffic routes that should be addressed in order to minimize the risk of forklift truck-related accidents. Keep pedestrians and vehicles apart. Separate routes, designated crossing places, and suitable barriers at recognized danger spots. High visibility clothing to be provided and worn if necessary. Clearly marked and signed traffic routes. Roads, gangways and aisles should have sufficient width clearance for the largest vehicle. Roads, Gangways and aisles should have sufficient overhead clearance for the largest vehicle. Speed limits established and enforced. Avoid designing in sharp and/or blind bends. Avoid overhead obstructions. The floor surface should be suitable and sufficient for the intended traffic. Floors and traffic routes to be adequately maintained. Gradients should be kept as gentle as possible, not too steep. Suitable and sufficient number of parking areas to be provided and be of the size to suit the vehicles intended to be parked therein. Avoid reversing if possible. Make people aware of the movement of vehicles. Describe additional measures that need to be taken to protect pedestrians from the risk of being struck by a forklift truck in the warehouse. A segregated system for vehicles and pedestrian traffic. Appropriate roadway and aisle markings. Maintaining a good level of visibility, e.g. mirrors, transparent doors, provision of adequate lighting, audible warning on vehicles. Establishing and enforcing site rules. The provision of refuges to allow vehicle passing if aisles have a restricted width. The wearing of high visibility clothing. Good standards of housekeeping. Training and supervision of all those concerned involved. Enforcing reasonable speed limits. Introducing a pedestrian has the right of way system. Lift trucks using horns when entering the building, approaching blind corners, etc. Ban on people using mobile phones, which may be a distraction for the work environment. Outline the precautionary measures that may be needed to prevent slips and trip hazards in an engineering factory. The condition of the floor road surface, these need to be well maintained, not holes, and kept in a clean condition. Having designated walkways. Having a protected walkway, fencing, barrier, etc. Timely removal of any contamination of the walking surface from spillages and leaks, etc. Ensure that accumulations of debris, stacking of items, etc. that cause obstructions to a walkway are not permitted. The availability of adequate space to undertake the expected task. The environment lighting levels to be adequate. Noise that may disguise traffic activity to be addressed. Footwear being worn to be suitable and sufficient. Introduction of training of persons so that they are aware of the dangers in the area and the site rules. Provision of warning and reminder signage. Identify 4 ways in which people can be injured by vehicles in the workplace. The most obvious way in which people may be injured by vehicles in a workplace is being struck and knocked down while the vehicle is in motion. Being struck by something falling from a vehicle. Being crushed between a vehicle and a fixed object. Being injured if 2 vehicles collide. Being trapped if a vehicle overturns. Falling from a vehicle whilst it is in motion. Being burned by the spillage of hot components such as oil or acid from battery-operated vehicles. Identify reasons why a scaffold may collapse. One of the main reasons why a scaffold may collapse is because it was not properly designed for its intended purpose. Other reasons include incomplete and incorrect erection, the condition of the ground on which it was erected, the poor condition or incompatibility of its components, unauthorized alteration or interference with the erected scaffold, uneven load distribution on or overloading of the scaffold, being struck by passing traffic and as a result of severe weather conditions. Give ways in which a vehicle driver who has not received adequate training may put the safety of other employees in the workplace at risk. There are a number of ways in which a driver who has not been properly trained might put the safety of persons in a workplace at risk. These include unauthorized or incorrect use of a vehicle, operating in a restricted zone or exceeding the speed limit, overloading a vehicle or loading a forklift truck incorrectly, parking in unauthorized areas, taking refreshment, smoking or using a mobile phone whilst at the wheel, leaving the ignition key in an unattended vehicle, carrying out a reversing operation incorrectly, carrying unauthorized passengers, an inability through incompetence to carry out routine checks of the vehicle and a failure to report defects. Identify issues that should be included in a training program for vehicle drivers in order to reduce the risk of accidents to themselves and other employees. Issues that need to be considered in this training includes operation of the vehicle's controls and ways to maneuver it safely both forward and in reverse. Information on the internal traffic routes and site rules including speed limits together with the signage and markings used. The specific workplace hazards such as restricted areas and the presence of hazardous materials, parking restrictions in force and the method of parking the vehicle safely. The requirements for giving right of way to pedestrians and other vehicles, information on the safe working load of the vehicle and how to secure loads and stack them safely when unloading. Securing the vehicle after use and the procedures for key management. The precautions to be taken when refueling the vehicle. The need to carry out pre-operational checks of the vehicle and the procedures for the reporting of defects and unsafe conditions. Health issues such as physical fitness and eyesight, and the employee's legal duties as contained in relevant country legislation. Identify possible hazards that could cause employees to be injured when walking through an external storage area of a workplace. The factors that may increase the risk of injury to employees who need to walk through the external storage area of a workplace including answers were generally the condition of the floors with the possible presence of potholes, loose coverings, oil and water. The presence of obstructions in the walkways. Changes in levels such as ramps, curbs or steps. A failure to provide barriers or fences round pits, voids or trenches. The possibility of being struck by moving vehicles or by loads falling from them because of a failure to segregate vehicles from pedestrians by the provision of suitable walkways. Objects projecting or falling from racking. A lack of housekeeping. A poor standard of lighting and inclement weather conditions. Outline control measures to consider for a suitable and sufficient traffic route. The control measures that should be considered when establishing suitable vehicle traffic routes on a construction site include the provision and maintenance of well-constructed roadways with adequate drainage and appropriate for the type and number of vehicles using them. Ensuring that the number of steep gradients and tight bends are kept to a minimum. The routes are kept clear of obstructions such as overhead cables. The physical separation of pedestrians from site traffic areas by the provision of walkways. The introduction of designated crossing points. The elimination of reversing maneuvers by the introduction of a one-way system. Providing turning circles using banksmen where required. The provision of designated areas for loading, sheeting and unloading. The provision of a good standard of lighting. The introduction, monitoring and enforcement of speed limits. The provision of clear signage indicating the right of way. Identify the main hazards that may be present during the demolition of a building. The main hazards associated with the demolition of a building include falls from a height or on the same level, falling debris and premature collapse of the structure, use of explosives, contact with and noise from equipment and heavy plant, dust possibly including asbestos, manual handling, The presence of hazardous materials from previous uses of the building. The presence of cellars or vaults affecting the stability of structures and adjoining premises. The presence of storage tanks both above and below ground and their current or previous contents. The possible presence of services such as electricity, gas and water. Hot work. Biological hazards from the presence of stagnant water and vermin. Describe what factors should be considered before a demolition project commences. Location and disconnection of public utilities such as gas, water, electricity. Legal considerations i.e. ownership and local authority regulations, neighbors and the effects of localized nuisance, dust, noise, sound of the work. Obtain building plans to determine any critical factors i.e. supporting walls and structures. Assess soil structure to allow safe vehicle movement. Identify any likely contaminants or contaminated land i.e. asbestos, dangerous substances, etc. Competency of contractors undertaking the work. Communication, consultation, and cooperation between the persons undertaking and/or coordinating the work. Degree of supervision required. Training in any specific aspects that may be particular to the demolition project being undertaken. Outline 8 precautions that should be considered to prevent accidents to children who might be tempted to gain access to a construction site. Fencing to be maintained in a good condition of repair. Ensure this by periodic inspections of the perimeter fencing. Warning signs of any dangers to be posted in conspicuous places. No man traps should be set to catch children and/or other intruders. Security patrols to operate regularly. CCTV used where physical controls would prove difficult. Isolating services when not in use, especially at times when the site may not be occupied i.e. weekend. Reducing heights of materials so that they do not become attractive climbing frame or pose less risk of becoming unstable. Covering excavations to ensure that children and others can not fall into the excavation. Removing ladders, lashing the ladders to deny access to scaffolding. Securing tools, chemicals, equipment and vehicles under lock and key. Community liaisons, either in close proximity schools, youth centers, etc. Identify the criteria when selecting a contractor. In deciding which contractor should be chosen for a task, the following should be considered. Do they have an adequate health and safety policy? Can they demonstrate that the person responsible for the work is competent? Can they demonstrate that competent safety advice will be available? Do they monitor the level of accidents at their work site? Do they have a system to assess the hazards of a job and implement appropriate control measures? Will they produce a method statement which sets out how they will deal with all significant risks? Do they have guidance on health and safety arrangements and procedures to be followed? Do they have effective monitoring arrangements? Do they use trained and skilled staff who are qualified where appropriate? Judgment will be required, as many construction workers have had little or no training except training on the job. Can the company demonstrate that the employees or other workers used for the job have had the appropriate training and are properly experienced and, where appropriate, qualified? Can they produce good references indicating satisfactory performance? Outline how your organization could reduce the risks to contractors both before and during the building project. Selection of a competent contractor and ensuring that they have relevant experience in the type of work expected in the project. Induction training to be effectively delivered. Training in expected safe systems of work and to include permits to work, lockout and tag out. Checks to ensure that they are aware of their duties. Satisfy yourself that they and anyone they employ or engage are competent and adequately resourced. That they plan, manage and monitor their own work to make sure that workers under their control are safe from the start of their work. Ensure that any contractor who they appoint or engage to work on the project is informed of your requirements and that they are allowed time to plan and prepare before starting their work. That they provide workers under their control, whether employed or self-employed, with any necessary information, including about relevant aspects of other contractors' work, and site induction which they need to work safely, to report problems or to respond appropriately in an emergency. Ensure that any design work they do complies with the requirements of your designers. That they cooperate with others and coordinate their own work with others working on the project. Outline the checks that could be made in assessing the health and safety competence of a contractor. Review of their health and safety policy document. Is it suitable and sufficient? What is their training program? What is the standard of risk assessments? How adequate are their method statements? How complete are their safe systems of work? What are their accident incident statistics? Do they have records of any enforcement action? Have they done this type of work in the past? Have they adequate insurance coverage? What competence proof do they have for their key workers, e.g. plant operators, electricians, etc.? Do they have reliable references? Do you need to visit an existing project to see firsthand how they perform on site? Are they members of a recognized trade association? List the factors that could be considered when assessing the health and safety competence of a contractor. This is a list question, thus a simple listing would suffice, but the following points need to be considered for inclusion. Previous experience in the type of work expected to be undertaken. Reputation within the industry with clients. Quality and content of health and safety policy. Availability of risk assessments. Level of training and qualifications of staff including health and safety staff. Accident enforcement statistics. Membership of official bodies. Equipment maintenance records. Detailed proposals of work to be undertaken. Recommendations from past clients. Ability to provide safe systems of work for the job, i.e. resources. Overall health and safety culture. Their arrangements to fulfill their duties with respect of the health and safety plan. A site visit to an existing project. Identify the factors that could be considered when assessing the health and safety competence of a contractor. In deciding which contractor should be chosen for a task, the following should be considered. Do they have an adequate health and safety policy? Can they demonstrate that the person responsible for the work is competent? Can they demonstrate that competent safety advice will be available? Do they monitor the level of accidents at their work site? Do they have a system to assess the hazards of a job and implement appropriate control measures? Will they produce a method statement which sets out how they will deal with all significant risks? Do they have guidance on health and safety arrangements and procedures to be followed? Do they have effective monitoring arrangements? Do they use trained and skilled staff who are qualified where appropriate? Judgment will be required, as many construction workers have had little or no training except training on the job. Can the company demonstrate that the employees or other workers used for the job have had the appropriate training and are properly experienced and, where appropriate, qualified? Can they produce good references indicating satisfactory performance? Outline measures to consider to help reduce the risk of injury to contractors and others. The measures to consider to help reduce the risk of injury to contractors and others include the initial completion of a risk assessment of the work to be carried out. The production of a method statement detailing the safe system of work to be followed. The provision of safe means of access to the place of work. The provision of roof edge protection such as guardrails and toe boards to prevent the fall of persons and materials from the roof. If the provision of this type of protection was not practicable, then the use of other equipment such as safety harnesses with adequate fixing points and or nets might be necessary. Identify areas of the roof containing fragile materials, to mark them with barrier signs and to prevent falls through them by the use of covers. The possible provision of a hoist to transport tools, equipment and materials to the roof. Outline the precautions that may be needed when carrying out repairs to a flat roof of a building. Before starting repair works, the occupants to be informed about the work that is to take place and the precautions which they should observe. Edge protection to prevent person fall from height by providing proper guarding of edges. Protection for falling materials. Toe boards at least 150 mm high to be fixed to prevent materials falling from the roof. Restricted entry by providing entry pass or visitor's log. Public visitor entry to be restricted by providing barriers or warning signs. Access egress proper and safe access and egress be provided by scaffolding or access platform, mechanical or electrical, or by ladders. Suitable controls to be taken in the use of chemical agents by providing personal protective equipment and preventing the entry of chemicals through inhalation, ingestion or absorption by prohibiting eating, drinking and smoking in work areas. Appropriate protective equipment to be used, gloves, hard hat, goggles, personal fall arrest equipment, inapplicable, etc. Environmental and climatical controls to be introduced as appropriate. Use of low voltage work equipment will be more suitable for working on roofs. Presence of asbestos cannot be neglected if the roofing material is of a sheet nature. Adequate clearance shall be maintained from overhead services. Outline the precautions to be taken when repair work is to be carried out on the sloping roof of a building. There are a number of precautions that need to be taken in such a situation, including the use of competent and trained persons, undertaking a risk assessment to identify hazards and adequacy of controls, working to a safe system of work, the display of appropriate warning signs, e.g. fragile roof, use crawling boards, etc. Availability of suitable and sufficient means of safely lowering broken tiles and materials, a properly inspected and erected hoist or the provision of an enclosed debris chute into skips. 1. Electrical isolation. Where barriers cannot be erected, the use of fall arrest devices such as safety net and harness. The provision of adequate training and supervision will also be required. Outline the precautions that should be taken to reduce the risk of injury to members of the public during erection and use of the scaffold. The situation outlined in the question is one seen often in town centers. The precautions that should be taken in such a situation should include excluding the public from the area where the scaffold is to be erected, obtaining a temporary pavement or even street closure if this is thought to be necessary, undertaking the erection work in the quiet hours such as early evening or late evening, erecting fans, tunnels and nets, using barriers and signs to direct the public away from the operation, storing scaffold materials safely on site, erecting cones and signs to direct traffic flow, preventing unauthorized access to the scaffold by boarding over the access ladder, using an internal hoist and or chutes, providing a close-boarded working platform with toe boards and guard rails, providing a good standard of lighting for enclosed walkways and ensuring the initial erection and subsequent regular inspections of the scaffold are carried out by competent personnel. Identify precautions to be taken to minimize the risks to workers when working on a scaffold. The precautions to be taken to minimize the risks to workers when working on a scaffold include ensuring the original erection and any subsequent alterations were carried out by or under the supervision of competent persons. Erecting the scaffold on stable ground using base and sole plates. Ensuring that working platforms were close-boarded and were provided with guardrails, mid-rails and toe boards to prevent the fall of persons and materials. Providing adequate bracing and tying the scaffold into the building or structure, providing safe access such as by secured ladders to the working platforms. Providing protection if the scaffold was adjacent to traffic routes. Ensuring the scaffold was inspected on a regular basis by a competent person. Providing personal protective equipment for the workers such as boots and hard hats. Identify when a scaffold should be inspected. A scaffold should be inspected at the following situations. Before being taken into use. At periodic intervals thereafter as may be prescribed for the different types of scaffolds. Following any alterations to the scaffold. Following any adverse weather conditions or other events such as a collision or fire, any of which might be likely to affect its strength. Give details of the inspection duties that should be carried out to ensure a scaffold erection is safe. A competent person to inspect all components of a system before first use and periodically thereafter. Erection of scaffold systems by experienced, competent and authorized operatives. Supervision of the erection of the system by a competent person. Consideration to be taken regarding the use of the scaffold and type of structure therefore needed. Inspect scaffold every 7 days. This can vary from country to country or even within different areas of the same country. The inspection of the scaffold after incidents of inclement weather by a competent person. Details of inspection to be maintained in an appropriate register. Various countries have differing formats on which this can be entered. Mobile tower scaffolds should be used on stable, level ground. Identify additional factors that should be considered for the safe use of a mobile tower scaffold. The additional factors that should be included for the safe use of a mobile tower could include the following. Ensuring the correct ratio between the height and base dimensions of the tower. The use of diagonal bracing together with outriggers. Wheels capable of being locked when the tower was in use. Ensuring the platform was fully boarded. Toe boards and guard rails were provided. The provision of a suitable means of access, preferably a fixed internal ladder. Positioning the tower clear of overhead hazards such as power lines. Ensuring the tower was not overloaded. That it was positioned to avoid overreaching. That it was not moved when loaded with equipment and or persons. Giving due consideration to its use in adverse weather conditions. Identify safe working practices for the use of a mobile elevating work platform, MEWP. Safe working practices which should be adopted for the use of a mobile elevating work platform, MEWP, include the involvement of competent persons both to operate and work from the platform. The completion of any statutory testing and inspection requirements. Its use only on firm level ground. Checks being made on the presence of overhead obstructions such as power cables. The use of outriggers which should be locked in position. The correct inflation of the tires with the wheels immobilized during elevation of the platform. The prohibition on moving the platform when elevated or in use. The use of harnesses by workers on the platform. The erection of barriers round the area where the platform is to be used. ensuring the platform is not overloaded. Securing all tools and equipment before the platform is moved, and introducing emergency procedures in the case of failure of the platform. Outline the factors to be considered in the selection and use of personal head protection at work. In the selection of personal head protection for a work activity, factors to be considered include its suitability for the task, its quality, for instance whether it carries a CE marking, its compatibility with other personal protective equipment such as ear defenders, its cost relative to the risk involved, its size, fit and adjustability, comfort factors such as its manufacture from non-irritant materials and the existence of an absorbent sweat band, its color if this is necessary to designate different categories of worker. Consideration would have to be given to procedures for the cleaning and replacement of the sweatbands. The regular inspection of the equipment for signs of deterioration. Its replacement at intervals recommended by the manufacturer. The provision of suitable storage for the equipment when not in use. Identify the principal hazards associated with the use of ladders at work. Poor maintenance of ladders is a significant concern. Areas of concern center around visible damage, poor maintenance, no pre-user checks, etc. Incorrect use insofar as ladders being used in an unsafe manner, sometimes by persons not in receipt of the proper training in how to complete the work expected of them using such equipment. Ladders being used in incorrect or inappropriate locations applicable to the type of ladder available, i.e. metal ladders being used close to overhead live electrics. Explain how these hazards indicated with the use of ladders at work may be eliminated or reduced. The hazards indicated above may be eliminated or reduced by periodic inspection of ladders to identify their state for continued safe use. Effective repairs to damage to be undertaken by competent persons. If this was not possible, then the equipment should be withdrawn and replaced. The correct storage is important to ensure that their condition does not deteriorate over time, making them unsafe for use in the future. Pre-use inspections for visual defects may assist in the early identification of ladder-related hazards. 75 degrees slope. 1 in 2004. Ladders should be secured at their top and base to prevent sliding or slippage. Not to use aluminum or metal ladders near overhead cables. Persons trained in the safe and correct use of this equipment. Management to periodically monitor work involving ladders to ensure that it is being undertaken in an appropriate and safe manner. Explain the issues that needs to be addressed if the work needs to be carried out safely in a ladder. Do not use the top 3 rungs. Ladders used for access should project at least 1 meter above the landing point and be tied. Alternatively, a safe and secure handhold should be available. Stepladder. Don't use the top 2 steps of a stepladder unless a suitable handrail is available on the stepladder. Stepladder. Don't use the top 3 steps of swingback or double-sided stepladders, where a step forms the very top of the stepladder. The ladder or stepladder rungs or steps are level. The weather is suitable. Do not use them in strong or gusting winds. Users to wear robust, sensible footwear, e.g. safety shoes, boots or trainers. Users to know how to prevent members of the public and other workers from using them. Users are fit. Certain medical conditions or medication, alcohol or drug abuse could stop them from using ladders. On a ladder or stepladder, don't slide down the stiles. Stand them on movable objects, such as pallets, bricks, lift trucks, tower scaffolds, excavator buckets, wands, or mobile elevating work platforms.
This is all about today's topic. Thanks for watching Phani EHS Info. And don't forget to subscribe our channel to get immediate notification of our videos. Share our videos to your friends and colleagues to create safety awareness. If you have any questions and requirements, please comment in comment box. And please visit our website www.phaniehsinfo.com for notes of our videos. Have a safe day.